Shen Qingqiu looked up. It was as if 2 yellow lanterns were lit outside the hall, a pair of huge golden eyes like bronze bells looking his way. Within each eye was a long slitted pupil, lending them a malevolent air. When those blind corpses heard that hiss, it was like they had suffered an incorporeal shock. They stopped in their savage pursuit and hunched their shoulders, heads lowered, huddling in a shivering mass. Those lamp-like eyes held Shen Qingqiu's gaze for a while before they suddenly disappeared. A moment later, a figure strolled in from outside the hall. Shen Qingqiu wasn't surprised when he made out the newcomer's form. "Xi Zhilang," he said. Zhu Zilang's feet nearly slipped out from under him. He rubbed his nose. Though he felt a bit glum, he didn't misplace his manners. "If Immortal Master Shèng wishes to call me as such, he may do as he pleases," he said with a smile. "So, you really were the one who stole my corpse from Qiongling Hall," said Shen Qingqiu. The poison that had left those disciples black and blue all over was likely a jade serpent's venom. The fact that Mu Jingfan had been unable to find injuries during his quick inspection was because the snake's teeth were fine and small, its bites difficult to discern. With a more thorough examination, you would find the imprints of teeth in hidden places like fingertips and heels. Everything happened so suddenly, and I could only resort to that inferior plan," said Zhu Zilang. "I hope Immortal Master Shèng will forgive me." Shen Qingqiu gave a dry cough. The, quote, everything that happened so suddenly, unquote, could only be referring to the time he used an entire town supply of Rialga wine to smoke out Zhu Zilang. Shen Qingqiu had even forced him back to his original form and ridden him quite a ways. "Your summoning me to the Holy Mausoleum," he said, "did resolve a certain troublesome situation had fallen into. Earlier, you invited me to the demon realm. Now that I'm here, can you tell me what exactly your goal is?" "I have already explained the first reason to Immortal Master Shèng," said Zhu Zilang. "A drop of kindness should be repaid with a torrent. As for the second, I was not the one who summoned Immortal Master Shèng. It may be best if you can ask my lord directly." "Very well. Where is Tianlangjun?" asked Shen Qingqiu. Zhu Zilang started. "I thought Immortal Master Shèng and my lord had already greeted each other." "Greeted each other?" Shen Qingqiu looked down at the stone coffin. Was the reanimated corpse in there Tianlangjun? Strictly speaking, they hadn't, quote, greeted each other, unquote. All right? The coffin that he had been unable to pry open, no matter his efforts, began to shake unceasingly and slowly slid open on its own. A person slowly sat up from inside. The person propped an elbow on the rim of the coffin and tilted his head with a faint smile. "Qingjing Peak Lord, it's an honor to meet you at last." Shen Qingqiu was stunned. Though this family's interests and hobbies spanned a wide range, they managed some coincidental similarities anyway, having the same unique style. The son liked to hold corpses, while the dad liked to lie around in coffins. In appearance, Luo Binghe resembled his mother, Su Xiyan, but you could more or less see the shadow of his father in him. For example, in the eyes. Tianlangjun's eyes were deep-set, his brow strong and heroic, the irises dark like fathomless water. In this, he and Luo Binghe were very much alike. Luo Binghe had a pretty boy appearance in the first place, but if his eyes had resembled his mother's too, his face would have been excessively feminine and the effect would be lost. For another example, the smile. Both the father and son smiles gave Shen Qingqiu an indescribable kind of ominous premonition. I have not been the Peak Lord for many years, Shen Qingqiu cautiously replied. Yet I have long awaited our meeting, Peak Lord Shen, Tianlangjun said, all smiles. Shen Qingqiu felt it down to his bones that one's force of personality could indeed only be determined by family background and upbringing. Putting aside everything else, if you sat both father and son in the same coffin in the same pose, Tianlangjun's kingly grace could make said coffin look like an emperor's throne. Luo Binghe, however, though he was handsome, would probably still look like he was sitting in a coffin. No wonder airplanes shooting towards the sky had felt threatened and given Tianlangjun's plotline the decisive axe. Being in the same space as two heirs of the heavenly demon bloodline, with the many dried, or not so dried, mummies of demon nobles as onlookers, Shen Qingqiu was under a lot of pressure. I wouldn't presume, he said with a smile that wouldn't reach his eyes. Since your distinguished self has longed to meet me for such a while, why won't you come out to do so? No matter how much Tianlangjun might want to show off, hanging out in a coffin was a little too much, unless Tianlangjun couldn't stand. Tianlangjun's hand tapped a slow rhythm on the coffin rim. His dark irises reflected the dim green flames leaping about the tomb as he spoke in a delighted tone. Of course, would the Peak Lord assist me? Even if this was a trick, Shen Qingqiu could only forge on. He leaned forward a bit and stretched out a hand. As you wish. Tianlangjun cheerfully took that hand and stood. So he wasn't concealing any weaknesses after all. Shen Qingqiu was a bit disappointed. Then the weight pulling on his arm disappeared. However, he was clearly still holding Tianlangjun's forearm. Shen Qingqiu shifted his gaze downward. He was indeed still holding it, but the forearm was the only thing he was holding. Shen Qingqiu's face was blank. Tianlangjun had lost an arm and one of his sleeves was empty, but he remained polite. It came off again. Would the Peak Lord please hand that to me? Shen Qingqiu said nothing. His hand didn't conduct the trembling of his spirit, and he calmly returned the severed arm to Tianlangjun. He and Zhu Zilang both wore expressions that suggested that this was all normal, and with a click, really a click, Tianlangjun snapped the arm back into place. Snapped it back into place. Are you a fucking doll? Your joints can be attached and detached just like that. Shen Qingqiu noticed that the flesh at the severed end, as well as in many other patches upon that arm, had turned violet black, looking especially frightful against Tianlangjun's pale skin. There were even faint dark patches creeping out from beneath his collar. Shen Qingqiu struggled with himself for a smile. With a flutter of a butterfly's wing, he had raised more than a mere tidal wave. His initial guess that Zhu Zilang had used the Jew mushroom to create a new body for Tianlangjun had turned out completely correct. However, it seemed that this Jew mushroom body could not provide Tianlangjun with the same satisfactory experience. The reason Shen Qingqiu's soul had meshed well with the Jew mushroom was twofold. First, the Jew mushroom had been grown using his blood and qi. And second, the Jew mushroom was a product of spiritual qi, and Shen Qingqiu also cultivated with a base of spiritual qi. In essence, the two were entirely compatible. However, Tianlongjun's situation differed. He was a demon, and he cultivated with a base of demonic qi. The Dew mushroom naturally reacted by rejecting him, and as expected, it seemed there was no freshness guarantee on his new body. So, a situation wherein the body had begun deteriorating was entirely possible. Tianlongjun rotated the reattached limb, then smiled. My apologies. Come to think of it, Pig Lord Shèng shares some of the credit in enabling us to leave Bailu Mountain. Shen Qingqiu looked at Zhu Zilang, who still stood silently off to the side. The snake man form he had possessed back in Bailu Forest had truly been a spectacle too awful to behold. Even so, in all the years Tianlongjun had been sealed under Bailu Mountain, Zhu Zilang had never left its vicinity, and upon obtaining the Dew mushroom, he hadn't used it for himself, but created a new body for his master without the slightest hesitation. What a paragon of loyalty! Shen Qingqiu scanned the tomb's murals out of the corner of his eye as he half-heartedly kept up the conversation. The credit belongs to Zhu Zilang. He laid low around Bailu Mountain for years until his chance finally came. With such a capable subordinate, Tianlongjun is someone to be admired. Have you heard my nephew's motto? Asked Tianlongjun. I have. A drop of kindness must be repaid by a torrent, isn't it? Zhu Zilang's face went red, turning it an eerie color under the green candlelight. My lord, immortal Master Shen, please don't mock me. Shen Qingqiu had no such intentions. He was at present turning the bulk of his focus towards the murals. These murals were brightly colored, their brushstrokes wild, but he could tell that the one directly across from the door was a giant woman's face. Her eyes were curved and the corners of her lips upturned, the expression of someone overtaken by joy. Without a doubt, of the 3 holy tomb halls of delight, fury, and sorrow, this hall was a hall of delight. Tianlongjun hadn't noticed anything strange. He's always been like this, somewhat hard-headed and inflexible. So he kept entreating me to bring you to the demon realm. Shen Qingqiu still didn't understand this logic. Collecting his thoughts, he gave Zhu Zilang a look. Does bringing me to the demon realm have anything to do with repaying a favor? Of course it does, said Tianlongjun with ease. Because none of the 4 major sects will be allowed to survive. If Pig Lord Shen was still at Changqiu Mountain Sect now, you would be included with them, so obviously he didn't want you to stay there. Shen Qingqiu didn't know how to continue this conversation. Just before, he thought this fellow a reasonable sort, but after conversing, he discovered that Tianlongjun was no different from all those final boss villains who set their hearts on the ambitious life goal of, quote, destroying the world and massacring all the heroes, unquote. But, come to think of it, if a nice young man of noble lineage was sealed under a mountain by a bunch of strange cultivators for that many years, it wasn't surprising that he would turn out resentful. Shen Qingqiu went silent for a moment, then tried to give a cooperative response. Is the next step exterminating the entire human race? Why would you think so? Asked Tianlongjun, confused. Of course not. I like humans. I just don't like the 4 major sects. He smiled and added, on the contrary, I have a gift for the human realm. Though Shen Qingqiu didn't know what sort of gift this was, it definitely wasn't something you could put a ribbon on and expect to make people happy. A roast was just about to leave Shen Qingqiu's mouth. somewhat rusty though he was, when suddenly a tremor spread through the whole tomb hall. Sand and pebbles tumbled loose from the ceiling. Even though Shen Jingqiu was standing firmly, he still swayed back and forth, and he even heard the faint and distant sounds of some creature's earth-shaking roar. Alarmed, he said, "What is that?" Tianlangjun listened closely for a moment. "This is even faster than I anticipated." He turned to Zhu Zilang. "How many?" "At least 200. Zhu Zilang said. Tianlangjun laughed. "Capturing even 10 would be impressive enough. He's gone to some trouble." Shen Qingqiu didn't understand this exchange, and it didn't look like they were going to loop him in either. Tianlangjun swept a smuttering of dust and sand from his shoulders. "Peak Lord Shen, for 5 years my nephew has been putting his all into helping you make a clean break from the Changqiu Mountain sect. What do you think? Will you go with him?" "The abduction is already done and I'm here in this tomb, so why the hell are you asking this now?" Shen Jingqiu paused. "Wait, 5 years ago, a clean break?" Shen Jingqiu's heart thumped. He blurted out, "That Sowa in Jinglan City was meant to be a catalyst for a clean break with my sect." No matter how you thought about it, the reasons he could never return to his sect all stemmed from the events in Jinglan City. "You ordered that Sowa to single me out?" he asked. Zhu Zilang lowered his head. Tianlangjun patted his nephew's shoulder as if in encouragement. "That was originally a little experiment to relieve the famine for the southern border demons, but Peak Lord Shen also happened to be present. Zhu Zilang merely wanted to completely remove Peak Lord Shen's desire to remain in the human realm." Shen Jingqiu immediately turned a furious glare towards Zhu Zilang. "This is what you call reciprocating in kind? Getting a soul to slander me, the hell? Of course a snake's way of repaying a favor would be utterly ridiculous." "Immortal Master Shen," Zhu Zilang said quietly, "since my lord has said he will eliminate the 4 major sects, he definitely won't leave a single survivor. This humble one truly hopes that at that time." Shen Jingqiu shoved down his anger. "Did you bring Qiu Haitang too?" "I don't know this name," said Tianlangjun. He looked at Zhu Zilang, and the latter immediately turned to Shen Jingqiu to clarify. "This humble one did not bring that woman." So, had the pincer attack between the Sowa's accusations and Qiu Haitang's sudden appearance, which had forced Shen Jingqiu to surrender to imprisonment in Huanhua Palace's water prison, really been only coincidence? Oh, whatever. Now that things had come to this, it probably didn't matter. "What about the other reasons?" asked Shen Jingqiu. "I indeed had some of my own reasons to summon Peak Lord Shen here," Tianlangjun replied. He continued slowly. "I must thank Peak Lord Shen for taking exceptional care of that son of mine all these years." Though Shen Jingqiu already suspected that Luo Binghe was involved, his heart still clenched. He forcibly collected his thoughts and asked, "Luo Binghe, what does this have to do with him?" Tianlangjun let out a chuckle and looked down. "How should I start? I discovered that for Peak Lord Shen, the feeling he nurses are especially—" He spoke vaguely and didn't even answer the question, but it wasn't difficult for Shen Jingqiu to string together an extensive chain of connections. the longer Tianlangjun used this body, the stronger his demonic energy became. In return, the more his cultivation recovered, the more tattered his body became, filling in with those dark patches. Sooner or later, he would need a new body. This body would ideally belong to one of his blood relations, a fellow heir of the heavenly demon bloodline. If it contained two separate cultivation systems due to mixed parentage, so much the better. Who could be more suitable than Luo Binghe? Shen Qingqiu squinted. You summoned my soul to draw him to the holy Mausoleum? Ah, Pig Lord Shen understands, Tianlangjun said. Luo Binghe has yet to assume the seat you once had, Shen Qingqiu reminded him. He can't enter the Mausoleum. Even if he wanted to, he couldn't. However, Tianlangjun seemed to have great faith in Luo Binghe. As long as he wants to enter, he definitely can, Shen Qingqiu said slowly. No matter what you want to do, he's still your son. Indeed. Your child, by Su Xiyan. So? Now Shen Qingqiu was sure. In the few words Tianlangjun had said about Luo Binghe, though his faint smile had not disappeared, an apathetic detachment had been evident within his words and expression. This Tianlangjun was far different from the deeply passionate and pacifistic character that Shen Qingqiu had originally envisioned. When he mentioned Su Xiyan, his voice didn't even tremble. He liked to call Luo Binghe, quote, that son of mine, unquote, but he didn't seem to possess any concept of fatherly affection. Not only was he not a pacifist, he wasn't even someone who believed that love prevailed over all. He had completely toppled Shen Qingqiu's long-held and one-sided preconceptions. In truth, this was quite normal. Demons were cold and unfeeling when it came to relationships. They were more inclined to the pleasures of good food and the admiration of strength and power. But it shouldn't have amounted to such an utterly uncaring attitude. Shen Qingqiu was a bit uncomfortable. Luo Binghe was in fact someone who was unloved by even his own parents. Shen Qingqiu had always placed the black pot of blame for Jinglan City on Luo Binghe's head. It seemed that child had been wronged all this time, and he had attempted to explain himself again and again to no avail. When they had parted not long ago, Shen Qingqiu had even viciously gorged at him with his words. He was rather dissatisfied with Tianlangjun, but if he thought about it honestly, he hadn't done much better himself. He had hurt Luo Binghe even deeper than his father had. This was the critical failure. The tomb hall fell into a deathly silence. Only when a second round of tremors descended, accompanied by the roars of hundreds of beasts, did their stalemate break. The quakes this time were even fiercer, the force nearly strong enough to collapse everything around them. Shen Qingqiu wasn't able to stay upright, no matter how steady his footing, and he put a hand on the coffin. Can someone tell me what exactly this... Before he could finish his sentence, the gemestone-studded ceiling overhead suddenly collapsed, coming down in chunks. All three people inside the tomb reacted quickly and dodged far away. With a deafening thud, something heavy crashed down and landed in the center of the tomb hall. Amidst thick roiling dust and haphazard glint of gems, an enormous black shadow appeared. Luo Binghe stood atop a pitch-black giant beast, sable robes fluttering amidst pale dust. Xingmo's sword was partly unsheathed behind him, cutting an imposing figure, and two eyes overflowing with crimson light gazed down, full of murderous intent.